Y'all ready?
Yep.
Is there a motion to go in closed meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Be it resolved, the Montgomery County Board of Supervisors, Montgomery County, Virginia hereby enters into closed meeting for the purpose of discussing the following. Section 2.2-3711. Consult with a legal counsel employed or retained by the public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel. 1. Midtown Partners Incentive Agreement, Old Blacksburg Middle School site. Discussion, consideration for interviews of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplinary, resignation, or Pacific officer, appointees, or employees of any public body. New River Community College Board. Madam Secretary, call roll, please.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Fizikowski?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Chair King?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Thank you. Is there a motion to go out of closed
So
session?
moved.
Second.
Whereas the Board of Supervisors of Montgomery County conveyed a closed meeting on this date pursued in affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provision of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and whereas Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by the board that such closed meetings was conducted in conformity with the Virginia laws. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Supervisors of Montgomery County, Virginia hereby certify that to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempt from open meeting requirements by Virginia law were discussed in the closed meeting to which this certification resolution applies, and only such public business matters as which identified in the motion conveyed the closed meetings were heard, discussed, or considered by the board. Madam Secretary, call roll, please.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Fizikowski?
Aye.
Chair King?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Thank you. Now we have invocation and pledge of allegiance. County Administrator, please.
If we could stand for a moment of silence, and then I'll lead us in the pledge. Let us pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Public address. We have nobody signed
No,
up.
we do not have anybody signed up.
We have no one signed up. If you'd like to speak, you can step forward and state your name and address, and you have 5 minutes. Seeing no one, we'll close this part. Addendum.
No addendum this evening, sir.
Consent items. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Madam Secretary, call roll, please.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Fizikowski?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Chair King?
Aye.
7 ayes.
I'll turn that portion over.
Need a motion to go into work session.
Okay. Is there a motion to go into work session?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Madam Secretary, call roll, please.
She's clicking away, I can see her.
We're going too fast.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Fizikowski?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Chair King?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our planning director, Emily Gibson, is going to give us an update on the Magnolia Farms LLC private street request.
Good evening. What you have in your packet for this meeting was the request and the review by the Planning Commission for a private subdivision street, and I'm going to walk you through that information. So the parcels are located, you can see here, off Childress, and then here's Meadow Creek. and it's the subject parcels that are outlined in yellow. They're slightly different configuration. I'll show you here, because several plats have taken place. There was a boundary line adjustment and minor subdivision a couple years ago, and then recently we approved a boundary line adjustment re-subdivision that created this parcel here separate along Meadow Creek, and so the subject property that we're looking at looks more like this parcel here. So again, the request is for a private subdivision street, and this is not something that you guys typically review. It's the reason we're bringing it up in work session is to be able to give you the background and the Planning Commission's recommendation, and we'll talk about what your options are when we get towards the end. But the only other time the board has approved a subdivision street that was private was the existing street that was in place for the Tejas project, and you guys will remember we just did an amendment to that recently where we didn't increase the density, but we did add more land there. That's the only other private subdivision street that we have in the county. So this was originally discussed with the Planning Commission back in March, and after the initial information was received by the commission, they decided not to make a decision that evening and asked the applicant to speak with VDOT about whether it could meet the subdivision street acceptance requirements that they have, which we have typically with our subdivisions, and it kind of letting them know that there is a waiver you could get for connectivity if that's an issue, and that there are some other processes we've seen applicants go through. They also raised concerns about having a private street means that you would have a school bus pickup here on Childress, which is fairly close to the intersection, and also mail delivery would be cluster of boxes there as well. So that's one of the things that they sort of talked about originally with the applicant. That was back in March. And during that time, the applicant did discuss the connectivity with VDOT. A formal request for a waiver wasn't made, and they could not get an exception due to grade because the grade doesn't exceed VDOT's maximum topographically. The owner indicated that the cost with the interconnection was undesirable, and there were no current development plans on the adjacent property to build that stub out to. And that property also does have road frontage. So that was information that came back to the Planning Commission. In addition, they submitted some of the paperwork you saw in your packet, and that did kind of mimic what we had on the Tejas property, sort of a notice to purchasers that you are purchasing on a private road. And that there would be no more than one home per lot, keeping the density lower, and an HOA would have to be established for the road maintenance agreement and also for stormwater on this project. And the owner wanted to continue to pursue a private street. They show an area at the bottom of the plat that is set off the right-of-way. And you have some pictures that were provided. One was of a bus pull-off that's in the town of Blacksburg to show you that this could be sort of a pull-off area, and that was meant to show some similarity there. That's here along Childress Road. So in addition to the right-of-way, they show this sort of out shape here for that. So this is kind of the proposed layout, and this is the proposed road. The agent on behalf of the applicant is here, and they can talk to you more about the specifics of the road, but they did show a typical section. And generally, this road does look like what we would see in a subdivision built to VDOT standards. However, this is a request for it to remain private. This is another graphic that was included by the applicant, and again, they're going to talk to you about this in more detail, but this has the breakdown of the grades and shows the extent between what is proposed to be the cul-de-sac, and then if they were going to have the connectivity, where that would have to step out to on the project. So the subdivision ordinance does say that private streets can be permitted if the median lot size is larger than 3 acres, the length of street per lot ratio is 150 feet or greater. They have a maximum grade of no more than 18%, a minimum width of 18 feet, all-weather surface, and an access plan and maintenance plan are agreed upon. We also took a look not only at what those minimum requirements are in the code, but what we talk about, particularly in our rural areas. So this is a rural area of the county. It's not proposed for growth. And the comp plan has a couple of things specifically tied to rural areas when talking about subdivisions, and that is that they have internal streets with connectivity to other rural roads, avoid strip development, minimize access points, and that private roads are generally discouraged. And if you go to the transportation section, for streets and new subdivisions, make provisions for connectivity, continuation of existing streets, and then future street extensions on subdivision plats. One of the reasons we always put those stub streets on is not just for VDOT's connectivity requirements, but as you guys know, minimum access points out to the whatever the main road is, which in our rural areas sometimes is not, doesn't feel like much of a main road, but that those connection points and letting those neighborhoods connect is something that our comp plan speaks to, as well as our code. So we had some conversations with VDOT. We got an initial email and subsequent emails, and I think that information's also been provided in your packet for tonight. And basically, they did say that no information was provided to them for an exception, but as I talked about earlier, they could meet the connectivity and don't exceed the topographic requirements there. They identified concerns with bus and the post office pull-off area regarding needing to really examine line of sight for stop vehicles, the lack of a taper into that pull-off area, how would grade and topography come into it, and what about drainage? If the curb and gutter are proposed, where's that drainage going to go? And also, I mean, just by the nature of it, their subdivision is only on one side, so that pull-off is only on one side. And so there's an assumption that the bus would be going only in one direction to use that pull-off in the most safest manner possible. So there's some certain assumptions that were made based on that area being provided, and VDOT wanted to take a stronger look at that if that was something that the county was considering. So when we put together the staff analysis, we brought up the ordinance requirements and that the comp plan discourages private roads for subdivisions, and that we normally do look for road networks and connectivity. Also, based on everything we've looked at so far, the subdivision street acceptance requirements could be met. There is a potential for an exception. If that adjoining owner does not want to develop, there's paperwork that they can sign saying they have no intent to develop within the next horizon, and that way you don't have to have an extension to that. And we see that pretty commonly as part of SSAR. So there were other connections that could be looked at to other parcels, and those weren't looked at. There was the one main connection on that graphic that was examined. So the Planning Commission recommended denial to you guys, and they had a conversation that we tried to summarize in the cover memo, but basically their concerns were mostly setting a precedent for future development. So as I mentioned, we approve a lot of subdivisions in Montgomery County, and we only have the one that has the private road. Most everyone else moves forward with the VDOT required road. They had some safety concerns, again, with the pull-off and the bus stop for mail. Private road issues, so we have at least one realtor on our commission who said, you know, private roads can be problematic when you're trying to do lot sales or house sales. Most do have a road maintenance agreement. This one obviously said that they would, but he just had some concerns about private roads in general. And then also they talked about, they felt like there was an ability to meet SSAR, and so they felt like if it could be met, it should be met. So that evening, their vote was 4-1. We had 4 planning commissioners absent that evening. And as I mentioned earlier, you have no resolution to consider this evening because after my presentation, there's also the agent on behalf of the owner is here. And after you have that information, you have some different options. So in this case, we can look at preparing different resolutions because for this consideration, you can deny, approve, or approve with conditions. Staff did not put together any conditions, but as I mentioned, we had some ideas in mind, as did VDOT. And so if that was the inclination of the board, we'd like to come back to you with some to consider. But we just didn't want to guess at where you might be. So tonight is just a work session to give you that information. Do you have any questions for me before I step aside for Mr. Neal or Mr. McDonald?
Can you go back to the, where you see the stub out graphic?
The colored?
Yeah.
Coded one.
So as part of as the liaison for the commission, I was privy to the conversation around this, and one of the questions was, can that stub out be anywhere else? Or does it have to be that blue line?
So typically, if you're trying to meet the connectivity requirement, VDOT just looks that you have connectivity to an adjacent undeveloped parcel, and there are other adjacent undeveloped parcels on the site. This is the one they used for their exhibit.
Can you show us along the perimeter where are the undeveloped sites?
So this shows you the general layout of what was proposed. This property here would be a candidate. Obviously, you have this sort of L shape. This is the property that it's pointing to now, the property to the north of the page there. This property is actually owned by the applicant and has the connectivity over to Meadow Creek. Probably not the ideal location. I think they've already pulled a building permit on this. So you had this parcel and this parcel as being identified. I'm going to go back to the aerial just so you can see where houses are. So you can see that's this parcel as well as this parcel.
So there is an 80-year-old gentleman that owns one of those or both of those parcels that the applicant didn't want to approach to get that letter signed.
So that is what they shared in the paperwork they provided to you. They indicated that was the owner of this parcel.
Which parcel? Okay, I see it. So that little leg above where those houses are, is that a possibility also?
So this is this area is owned by the applicant, and this parcel is also undeveloped. I don't know that they examined what that would be like. I think they just examined the one connection point.
Okay, that's all my questions, thank you. Oh, one last question, line of sight. Can you explain what that means?
So on the resubmittal, VDOT, where they showed, go to the actual plat. So on this plat, they show that L shape there, where adjacent to the right-of-way, they were proposing a pull-off area for mail and or bus pull-off. Whenever you're adjacent to the right-of-way, being able to pull back out safely, so that's what you mean by line of sight usually. And you can have horizontal line of sight and vertical line of sight. So around here we have hills where there could be a car below vertical line of sight, and then you have horizontal. So the concern was if there's a bus in there and they're pulling back out into the road, how would they maneuver to make sure they had the best line of sight to get back out?
And has anybody explored, if it's compromised with that design right there?
We have not. So this submittal came in and the applicant wanted to move forward. VDOT indicated that that was some of the concerns that they had if it did move forward, that they'd want to identify some items that maybe could be conditions in order to make sure it was as safe as possible.
And just one last question. So it's obvious that they're thinking that the bus is going to be coming right to left, but can the bus pull in there if it's going left to right legally?
Oh, you mean turn around in Childress Road? I don't think that's a legal maneuver.
Well, we could
Well,
ask
I'm
the
just-
bus driver. That's
I'm
with
just
us.
saying-
Argue
I'm just
back.
saying-
It wouldn't be a safe one.
Yeah. it's not necessarily illegal to do, to cross the road and face traffic the wrong way.
Oh, okay.
even
I
though
see. You're
off
not
the
saying
road.
turn around. You're
No.
saying to pull off into
Yeah.
it.
So I'm going left to right and I pull
Mm-hmm.
on the other side of the road. Is that illegal to do?
Yeah, it's illegal to park that way, and I would think, I know for a bus, you would want to do that because then you're dumping your students or whoever out in the road.
That's true. Okay.
Or bad.
Do we know which way the bus is going these days?
We don't, and
Okay.
certainly that could change year to year, just depending on the route the school does. So,
Thank you very much.
Any more questions?
Chris had one on the notice to all the potential purchasers, like, like when you buy a house out there, so you understand it's a private road. Then what happens, like I buy the house and I sell it. Do I have to give this to the person I'm selling it to too?
yes, I think it has to run with the property. It should be in the deed. It should go along with the. It should be recorded. Yeah, it would be recorded. Marty says yes.
Okay.
But Mary, let me ask you a question. When the lawyer signs this thick of a stack of paperwork and says, here are all this you need to sign, will you know that there is a private road that you are going to have to be paying into? And then if one of your neighbors doesn't pay into, are you going to be willing to sue your neighbor to force them to pay in for the private road maintenance?
Or are you going to come here and ask to have the road paved? That's what usually happens. Okay, thank you.
Okay. The agent for the owner has a presentation for you also.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sure. Okay, there's the first one. There's the second.
Yeah, there should be 10 there.
Oh.
Hopefully make its way down the line here as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Board of Supervisors. My name is John Neal. I'm an engineer with Gay and Neal Incorporated here in Christiansburg. I want to provide a presentation tonight on our request for Magnolia Farms to have private roads. I'm representing Chris Smith and Dale Smith and Leslie Harrington as a family development and construction company that builds houses in the New River Valley. They have most recently been focused in the town of Christiansburg, building residences there, Seneca Springs, Reagan's Point, and previously Windsong. But they live in Montgomery County proper, out on this property. Chris's house is right, Chris's house is right here. Dale is planning to construct his house here, and then Leslie lives here. One of the precipitating factors for this subdivision is that Chris's wife's parents are going to live here. So you can decide whether that's a good idea or not. It's both family and both sets of parents are there, but that's kind of the plan. One thing I want to point out is we have 5 existing lots, and maybe even 6. I think the way the staff had the presentation, this lot is not included because there's nothing really going to change on it. So it's off to the side. It's Leslie's lot. She lives there, and it would not be incorporated as far as their lot assignment or any of the boundary line adjustment changes, things like that. And we're proposing 6 additional lots and upgrading this existing private drive that's right in here that serves these houses today. Proposing a full length of 1,280 feet. And 500 of that feet of that length kind of already exists. We would be upgrading it, improving it. And this would be on well and septic. So it's a rural subdivision.
Our request to allow lots to be served by a private road is only for one reason only. We've looked at it, and we have the road right now set up that it would meet VDOT's complete geometric requirements, both horizontal and vertical. We are going to meet, if we're fortunate enough to do a private road, we're going to meet all the stormwater management requirements that would come along with all that stuff, as far as county requirements. The only request we have is that we do not want to put in the connectivity that is in VDOT's secondary street acceptance requirements. And I have an excerpt that I handed out to you all that goes into some of the secondary street acceptance requirements and some of the philosophy and when they originally put these requirements into place, why they were doing it. And I've highlighted a few portions of that. But why are we requesting to not meet that connectivity requirement? And there's quite a few reasons. One of those is cost, absolutely. It costs substantially more to build a large portion of VDOT street that you're not going to use. And that would directly impact, like I said, we have 6 additional lots at the cost that we have right now. It's $230,000 for that additional street that we'd have to construct. That adds about $30,000 to $40,000 per lot to the cost of the lot. If we build that road, that is no telling when it might be connected to in the future. We also, the intent of the VDOT requirements, that's where I have that handout I'd like you to look at. There's also environmental impacts that come with building a road, disturbing land, and paving it. There are real impacts that has on the downstream properties. Also, the future VDOT maintenance burden. One of the things that is in that package and is in that handout, VDOT talks about how they are struggling to maintain the roads that they have. So that's something to consider as well. We are proposing a bus stop, and I'll get into a few more details about that, as well as a cluster mailbox, because the U.S. Mail will not deliver on a private road, and so we'd set up a cluster mailbox for that. And then the assurance to make sure, and I've heard from a couple of you that you get these calls about people wanting you to take over the road, and I understand that fully. We were involved in HS Tejas and have been all the way through. I'd be lying if I said it's exactly the same thing, because it's not. They're 2 totally separate projects. I think it's worked out pretty well so far. So we talked about the cost of the road. Adding on a rural lot of about 5 acres, adding to the base cost of the lot $30,000 to $40,000. That starts to put people out of the market of availability to afford that lot and build a house there. The other thing is VDOT's intent for their connectivity requirements. And I've read through it, and I went through the process when we used to not have the connectivity requirements. We were designing a subdivision. We've been through this entire process. I think of reading the document and talking with folks at VDOT, the intent of that connectivity requirement was to avoid things like this right here. Where we have multiple, and there's a famous little graphic, and I can show it to you, where there's 2 houses that are back to back, and it's like, if I want to drive to my neighbor's house, I've got to drive 15 miles around this circuitous route and everything to get to my neighbor's house. And so that was kind of the thinking, is these larger, more suburban areas that are creating cul-de-sacs, because lots on cul-de-sacs are a lot more valuable. And so that was one of the thinkings of that, as well as topography and other issues was the reason you had them. But that was kind of what that intent was about, not this right here. And this is our project here, and I want to show you a couple of things and point out a few things. Emily mentioned we do have really kind of 2 parcels that are considered undeveloped. There is a house on this parcel here, but it has got a lot of acreage, as well as this parcel here also has a house right in here. But both of these properties have right at 1,000 feet of VDOT road frontage. So quite possibly what you would see if you were someone that was going to develop this parcel or this parcel you would start at your existing road, and we might have a road up here of connectivity, but immediately as soon as you get in here, have some topographic challenges. We certainly don't meet VDOT's exacting requirements of the percent grade. There is a swale that comes from this property over here. There's a swale that runs right through here like this, if you can see that. So that presents some challenges in and of itself. If you're developing this property, you're probably wanting to start down at a larger road versus coming through an existing subdivision. So the thing I wanted to point out as well is, if we're looking here, we see Route 8 over here, Childress Road right here, and then Meadow Creek right here. That connectivity that we've heard and talked about is about trying to provide additional connectivity and networks of streets. In this rural setting, if I lived here, I might go out this way to get on Meadow Creek, but it is not impacting my life, like you said, about I'm having to go 20 miles out, 15 minutes outside of my way, 20 miles outside of my way to get to my neighbor's house. I like to think and hope that folks here are going to be able to walk on the private road and ride their bikes, and it's a different atmosphere than the connectivity that we need to provide. And also you can see Chris's house right here. One of the other things that was listed as the intent on that PLU 1.3.3 was minimizing access points to some of your larger collector roads like Route 8, Childress Road, Meadow Creek Road. Right now we have 2 lots down here fronting this. Those would probably, if you're holding fast to the connectivity points, you're going to end up with just driveways on Childress Road. And that's probably what would happen on both of these parcels as well. They'll end up blotting out along the frontage and then preserving the back for a couple of large parcels. Here was that graphic that we talked about, and you can see that swale coming down through here. And that's one of the reasons we have the cul-de-sac here, is to allow that drainage path to continue on. Cluster mailbox, I just want to show you an example of that, as well as the bus pull-off and the VDOT comment about not having a taper in the line of sight. We will absolutely have to work through those issues should we be afforded the request for a private road. That's not something that we're going to get away with, or it's not going to be fixed when we get to that point. That preliminary plat showed this area here. We'd certainly have the radius and taper for the street here, as well as VDOT's site distance requirements were at 10 feet off the edge of the road, and that's the site distance, so we just make the bus stop wider. That's not a problem. The assurance that I want to talk to you about, we've got several different, what I'd say, check valves to try to do the best we can. And Mr. Tuck, like I said, somebody goes and they sign up for a mortgage and they sign it and they don't look at anything. And I mean,
Yep.
I understand that, but at the same time, they signed it.
I know Virginia law, I know Virginia law deems that anything you sign, you've read. But I also know that folks sometimes don't understand what they're signing, and that private maintenance agreement comes with a lot of obligations.
So one of the things that we have is on the subdivision plat, and on every page of the subdivision plat would be this note here that talks about this private road note. It's very specific about what it is. We'd also have in the deed that, and this is from H.S. Tejas, I copied this out of that, and we'd end up incorporating a similar note, that each property owner within the subdivision shall be required to participate in the cost of maintaining private unnamed road or its successor road, and those types of things in there, that they also have to sign that specific document. In other words, it's not just, you're signing all this, there is that specific document that they have to, and it's going to be a one-pager. So you like to think that if you got a one-pager, you are looking at it hopefully a little bit closer. But I understand your point. And then last but not least, maybe most important, is prior to the sale of any lot, it would be required that there's a notice to potential purchasers that they have to sign and the seller has to sign. So as big as you asked about the, second owner down the road or third owner down the road, that seller is going to know and let them know that I'm part of this road maintenance agreement, and we do this, we pay these dues to keep it up every month, or we pay this every month, or we've got a paving coming up, and the purchaser's going to say, hey, you're going to discount a lot for if I've got to pay some of this, and those types of things. So I think that could work out. So here's an example. Here's where that private, no, this is on the H.S. Tejas plat, right there in the middle of the plat, and we put it on every page. And then from the county code and this, or the subdivision ordinance actually, under the design and arrangement of lots, it specifically talks about that street, major and minor subdivisions must abut on, and right here, a proposed private street approved by the Board of Supervisors and to be constructed in accordance with the provisions of this article. And then when you go down into the next section on the private street, the thing I wanted to point out, I've got it on this page here, is in order to promote, and this is in the county's subdivision ordinance, in order to promote efficient utilization of land, which we think we are promoting in this instance with this request, or to reduce the number of access points to public streets. So we're trying to minimize the access points to those public streets. Board of Supervisors may permit construction of private streets so long as such streets are not likely to inhibit future development of adjacent land. Both of those two parcels that we connect to have 1,000 feet of road frontage on both of those. Private streets may be permitted in the following types of developments, and one of those types of developments is a single-family subdivision. And it says specifically that approval will be based upon a review of an access plan that shall include construction specifications as well as a maintenance plan or agreement. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. I said that, and then I'll say, the older gentleman that owns the property behind would have been probably one of the more easy things for us to do, is for Mr. Smith to approach the older gentleman that owns that property. It's our understanding that they wanted a long-term commitment to not develop the property, and Chris did not want to put this gentleman in a position of making that decision for his heirs and those types of things, and that was a conscious decision he made. And I understand it and agree with it. Be happy to answer any questions you have.
Questions? I got it. Yeah, I understand your issues with the putting in a second connection, but I was reading the letter from Paul Brown, and he talks about that you may be eligible for a waiver. Have you looked into that and
Yes, sir.
see if you can meet that?
We have, and so the specific requirement of that waiver requires the existing topography to be, I think it's greater than 15%, and we're at like 13.5%, I think. So we're just under that requirement for that waiver, as well as requesting the adjacent property owner say they're not going to develop their land. And so we didn't see either of those two routes to gain the waiver as viable.
I noticed on that plat that you had it highlighted in green. On the plats that are recorded and handed out, is that?
No, that's not highlighted.
They're usually black and white, but I just thought I'd
Yes, sir.
double check to see.
I'd love to put color on it if somebody will let me.
I don't know that the clerk's office will allow you
Don't think
to.
it's gonna happen.
I had a question, and I think I got my answer, but I want to make sure.
Sure.
So the road you're proposing will be paved or gravel?
Paved, yes, sir.
Okay.
Will 100% meet all of VDOT's horizontal and vertical geometry and paving sections, other than the connectivity.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That's all.
To me, when I heard this for the first or second time, it made a lot of sense, because who needs paved, land when there's no connectivity need? And for as long as the 80-year-old gentleman owns that property, it's highly unlikely that he's going to develop that property.
They have owned it since 1981 is the sale date.
So it'd be this paved piece of property that ends up just kind of a wasteland because it's not no one's using it.
Correct.
There's no driveways that connect to it or anything like that.
No, ma'am.
Now, I'm not quite, I don't know the VDOT rules of private roads becoming VDOT roads, so someone has to help me with this. So let's say that you don't put we approve, not that you have to put in the extension, but can we allow it to be turned over to VDOT anyway?
I don't think they'd accept it, I think.
Yeah, we can allow it to be submitted to VDOT, but VDOT won't accept it.
Okay.
Emily, you want to clarify?
John showed the one of the private road notes that we require, but in part of that note says that it will never be asked to go into the Commonwealth of Virginia's system.
So what happens if, 30 years from now, they haven't saved enough money to pave that private road properly? Is there,
They have a bumpy ride to their house.
and there's nothing that we would,
Doesn't mean that someone wouldn't ask you, but the road wouldn't be eligible. So in the same way that we bring things like rural additions to you guys, only certain roads are eligible to even be part of rural additions because they had to be platted at a certain time and not in a knowing fashion that they were, being done in a certain way that meant they couldn't go into the system.
and that's why this would never be able to.
This would not qualify. No. I don't like to use the word never, but
No, I understand. I
but
understand.
pretty much never. Yeah.
And if I may say, the bumpy road to their house, if, like I said, the pavement slowly over time deteriorates. One of the good things about this, it's different than HS Tejas. HS Tejas is up the hill and a very long route. This is a relatively small length of road, and it is on a very easy grade. So I guess what I'm getting at is it is set up to last as long as it possibly can versus some of the other challenges that like HS Tejas Road would have.
That's all I have. Thank you.
I'm still confused. You say it's an easy grade, but the grade exceeds what VDOT would
So-
accept?
So the grade for us,
And I'm talking about for a waiver.
correct.
Right.
Yes, sir. So the grade that on the road that we have proposed right here is good. We're at 6-7%.
Okay.
There's a swale, and I'll go back here now if I can. There's a swale that comes from this area right here through here. And so our cul-de-sac stops about right in here, right? This swale comes down, and there is a pretty significant bank, topographic bank right in here that, while it meets VDOT's technical requirements, would create a substantial amount of effort to get that on grade because, so VDOT used to, there used to be in the interim, there was a thing about like, just provide connectivity, provide the right-of-way for the future extension of a road. And we'd be happy to do that. There's no problem whatsoever. The problem is when somebody actually has to construct that. And so what VDOT has now put into place, which adds all this pavement and construction and a road that just sits there and doesn't get used, is you have to pave right up to the edge of the property line. And that gets into some issues where, and this is my engineering judgment opinion. This crest, this is the top of the hill, is kind of right in this area right here. So we could pave right up to that edge, but VDOT has vertical curve requirements that you might have to meet. So they get us to a point where they tell us that you have to plan for the future extension of that road. So then we're starting to design stuff on this older gentleman's property, a vertical curve to make sure that the road would meet VDOT standards in the future and be taken over. And what that might mean is that we dig into the hillside and we're actually 4 feet deep right at the property line there. And then he has to cut that road out to get it to extend. Or the other option is we take it to the property line and meet it right at the grade that his property's at. But then when he goes to extend that road, or his grandkids or whoever goes to extend that road, they can't extend it because it would not meet VDOT's vertical geometry requirements.
So the plat that you show here, that's in black and white, where it shows the cul-de-sac, that has crossed over that drainage area?
No, sir, we're just short of it. You can see it right here. This is a little bit better of a picture. So right here's that swale.
Right.
That stormwater and the grade and everything flows through. We're stopping just short of that.
And that would not meet the waiver.
So what we would have to do is extend the road in the blue here, and we do not meet the technical requirement for the waiver of 15% grade
Okay, I
on our
got it.
property. This over here, you can see this is a 13% grade, and now this is a 13% grade on the LiDAR topography that the county has shot, and it is, you can see these contours here. These are 10-foot contours. So over a relatively short distance of time, if I was to go out there and check on his property, that grade might be 18%, or it might be, 12%.
Okay, I guess where I was confused, I didn't realize that the waiver would require you to go ahead and extend it to that blue line. So that answers my question. Thank you.
Well, so let me, I don't want to mislead you. If we were granted the waiver, then we would not be building the blue portion. But we technically can't be granted the waiver because the grades that we see out there don't exceed 15%.
Or you haven't gotten the letter from
neighbor.
the gentleman.
Correct.
Okay.
Any more questions? Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate your time.
Mr. Chair, next item on the work session agenda this evening is a discussion of Board of Supervisor compensation, and I believe Vice Chair DeMott is leading that.
Before we move off the other item,
sorry.
does the
Did I
board
just
want to
walk right
provide
over?
any direction
just
for a
move it on.
future meeting? So we don't have an action item for you on this. But as I mentioned, you have a couple of different options, and we can just put it on a future agenda. I mean, like I said, staff didn't want to assume what the board may want.
I didn't assume anything. That's
Can
why I
you
moved
tell
right.
us what kind of conditions might arise?
So some of the things that we've identified relative to what type of construction would need to be there if they were considering the pull-off that they've proposed, that would definitely be something we would look at. A couple of times, the agent has indicated that this road would definitely meet all the other VDOT requirements related to geometry. So that would definitely be something that we would be looking for. Right now, we wouldn't have anything like that. So if we were looking to move forward with some type of approval, we would want to put some of those items into some language that I would work with both VDOT and Marty on to make sure it was something that was achievable and beneficial.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So Mr. Neal just mentioned something about perhaps, obviously, not putting in that extension, but grading maybe, or?
I think he indicated he would plat a paper street,
Yeah.
so offer the right of way. That could be something that we looked at as a
Is there any
option.
benefit to that?
Sure. I mean, we have as he mentioned, the way that they used to do subdivision streets were along those lines. The issue becomes the separation from the property line means that the second guy in actually has to do a lot more work to make the connection and often obtain approvals and things on adjacent property. And that's one of the reasons that VDOT requires that you build to the adjacent property now. if you build it, they'll also go ahead and take that into the system and they'll maintain it and keep it up so that it's a little easier for the second person to come in to use the connectivity. And that's one of the reasons you saw the genesis of change in those requirements for subdivision streets.
So what happens, Mr. Neal said, at that crest of that hill, one side might be 10 feet lower or 5 feet lower than the other side, and what happens when and if somebody tries to connect?
Well,
and
you'd
it's
have
off?
50 feet of public right-of-way that would go all the way to, and probably temporary turnaround, depending on how it was designed. So you'd have some easements and public right-of-way in place for that connection to be made. So if I only have to go to my property line and I've got 50 feet of right-of-way to work with, I may have to obtain a drainage easement or something to that effect. But it would not be that I had to, obtain any other approvals to go on to the adjacent property. It's similar in process, but ultimately if someone wants to connect, and obviously VDOT would want them to connect if it was already in their system for maintenance, that they would have to just go through the process of whatever that looked like at the time.
Supervisor Shepherd.
Just a quick question. So the bus pull-off, is that a requirement per VDOT because of the private road?
No, VDOT has some concerns about the bus pull-off. I don't know if it would actually be feasible, so it would definitely be one of the things that we would look at to see if it was a meaningful offer or potentially made things worse, depending on line of sight or any other drainage issues and things with the road.
I assume that's going to be for a school bus.
Well, I think it's meant to be mixed. So yes, school buses, but also a place for folks to be able to pull off to go to that cluster mailbox.
To get their mail.
As well.
But as far as buses, it's just for school buses.
Yes.
And
Yes,
they
we have no
they big
transit.
red lights
We have
and
no
stop signs.
transit plan
And I've
in that
never pulled off
area
road
right
to pick
now.
anybody up or drop anybody off. So that's all. So,
Is there a reason why the bus will not go through the private road? Is that against bus rules?
That is a school policy rule. I'm
So
not sure.
otherwise, the bus would stop on that road and wait for the kids to get on it, just like any rural road.
Yes.
Versus pulling off.
I stop on Price's Fork Road where it's 45 mile an hour and pick up kids. So, I mean,
Is there any more questions? So is there consensus to bring it in front of us with conditions?
I think they've got a right to find out how we're going to vote. And I'm happy to say that with conditions, but I'm not saying I'm going to vote in favor of it. But I think the developer has a right to be heard and know what they're going to be able to do. But if I'm going to vote for it, it's got to have those conditions.
Can they bring back the conditions to us so we can?
Yeah, I'm sure they'll work together.
We
discuss it.
we can bring you a list that you can evaluate and pick and choose from if you're interested. We just didn't do that up front, not knowing what the board's appetite was going to be for the request.
Is there a precedent or something that when the staff and the planning commission deny it, that the board of supervisors don't deny it or do, I mean, is this, if we approve it with conditions, has that ever happened before? And is that a precedent that we want to?
It's happened a few times.
It has?
On
Okay.
different things.
I mean, the planning commission is an an advisory board to this board, so we take their advice under advisement when making our decision. So,
Right.
and that's, I mean, am I correct in viewing it that way? I don't want to.
Well,
But all-
the precedent's not really with staff or the planning commission. The precedent's with the next developer who wants to come up with something similar.
Right.
Now you set precedent and you really can't not approve their private road if it's similar. That's the precedent. It's not staff's recommendation or planning commission.
But I think I recall, and I'm not sure if it went while I've been on this board, but at least since I've been attending these meetings, that we take the planning commission's advice pretty consistently. So are we, I'm not thinking,
That's true.
it's incredibly rare for us to counteract. I don't know this process exceptionally well.
Well, and I think that that speaks to the fact that this is only the second time that the board has had this in front of them. And the Tejas situation was different because that road existed, and they wanted to use that old road bed to develop a subdivision along. So this is actually really the first of its kind that the board's been hearing. So that's why Marty brings up that should this move forward, we could anticipate other requests. Because the items that were identified are not unique to this subdivision per se. Every subdivision street would like to be shorter and less expensive and things like that also. So we could work on items that are conditions that make it as specific as possible. But at the end of the day, it would be a private street, privately maintained in a subdivision.
So I personally am not particularly interested in hearing conditions because I don't think that this is a precedent that I am comfortable setting. So that would be my opinion.
Well, I was on the board, I don't know when it was exactly, but Marty might remember when we really made an effort to stop the private roads. Remember? We made it sort of a priority not to have private streets. So I don't know if that's when we redid our comp. I don't know when it was, but I remember the discussion.
And I was trying not to make a decision until I had all the conditions, but I share Supervisor or Vice Chair DeMott's concerns along those lines. As going to Sarah's question, I can only say to my process, I first look at what the staff has to say, then I listen to what the Planning Commission, but the bottom line is our decision, we're the elected officials. But I also try to think of how this is going to affect future boards and what we're going to be doing. But in my mind, if we're going to vote on something, I want to see the best version of it. And so that's why I was thinking about seeing the conditions.
And to me, it makes absolute no sense to extend that to nothing, right? The impact on the environment or whatever. So having it on the plat or whatever Mr. Neal was saying makes sense to me, but still it's a private road.
That's what the problem is.
And if the consensus is that we don't want, and we want to minimize the number of private roads, then no matter what the conditions are, it's still going to be a private road. Then most of us may still deny it, right? Am I, the logic kind of going that way, or am I missing some kind of content there?
That's my feeling.
In other words, no matter what possible conditions that you can come up with, it's still going to be a private road, and we're still not going to want it. Did I just summarize it correctly, or am I missing something?
That's how I feel.
Okay.
We'll prepare a resolution for a future meeting and let you guys have a vote at that time. And if there's been any changes or anything, if it's a resolution to deny that doesn't pass, we can talk about condition.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I apologize for walking over the end of Emily's presentation there. Everybody got quiet, so I said, let's move on. The next item we have on work session this evening is a discussion of Board of Supervisor compensation, and I believe Vice Chair DeMott is going to lead that discussion.
So just to rehash where we were the last time we talked about this, currently the Board of Supervisors salary is $11,000 annually. The vice chair is $12,200. The chair is $12,800. The last time we talked, we looked at some similar size counties. We also looked at some different size counties and kind of came up with there's no real rhyme or reason on who is paid what and why, because there are much, much smaller counties paying much, much more and larger ones paying the same. And so when we last left this, we had talked about doing a couple of things. We had talked about looking at what the Board of Supervisors' salary would be adjusted for the raises that we have given in each of the 14 years, I think it was 14 years, since the Board of Supervisors' salary has increased. If we said $11,000 14 years ago, staff raises were at X, where would we be now? And then we also talked about how do we determine what amount we might be proposing. Carol, do you happen to have the figures on the cost of, or the employee raises with you? Why, thank you. Could you present those for me?
Okay, so I looked at a couple of things in terms of salary increases, and we're talking about the period from 2006 to fiscal year 20. So I looked first at just the scale adjustments, what happened with the pay scale across the board for each one of those years for employees. Sometimes there were percentage increases, other times there were none. So I applied that for each year and then compounded that as you went forward, the same way we would have done with employee salaries. The second thing was to look at the scale adjustments plus if they got a percentage merit increase. So I added those together. And the third method was to look at, take Supervisor Bones' suggestion, look at the CPI inflation, and then that only went up to April 2019. So I added the amount of raise on top of that for fiscal year 20 that's provided to employees. So those are the three different methods. The first method with just the scale adjustment for employees would result in a $2,617 increase from what you're paid currently at $11,000. The scale adjustment plus the merit increase would result in $3,813. The CPI inflation plus the 3.5% for fiscal year 20 would be $3,672.
Thank you. And so, Carol, I really appreciate that because you're going to be much more efficient and effective at that than I am. So from what Carol, the information that she gave me, it looks like we're in a range of $2,600 to $3,800 based on those metrics. We also discussed doing something reasonable, and so I was looking at the most recent actions of the school board just as a for example, and in this most recent fiscal year, they had raised their salaries $2,400. And so I thought that that was a reasonable place to at least start a discussion this evening at $2,400 because that is actually below the adjustments that Carol had looked into for us. And then also we need to have a discussion about the positions of chair and vice chair and whether if we make a decision to increase the supervisor's salary, do we increase the chair and vice chair by the same amount? Do we create a larger difference between those two? Right now the difference is, again, $11,000 for a supervisor, $12,200 for the vice chair, and $12,800 for the chair. So there already is some difference built in. But those were the pieces of information I understood that we needed to have in order to continue a discussion on it tonight. So I guess my question to all of you would be, do we think, do we still want to pursue this? We do have to make a decision before July the 1st. So one, do we still want to pursue this? And two, do we want to start discussing at $2,400? Is that reasonable or unreasonable? And I guess I'm just kind of asking for your perspectives.
Can we answer the first question first?
Oh, yeah.
Which was, do we want to consider this?
Do we want to continue having this conversation?
I'm willing to keep considering this conversation.
I am as well. As you all know, I'm not running again, but I have pointed out that the obligations of the chair, which many times includes the vice chair, and staying up with, in my mind, the rate of inflation. I'm willing to talk about it. I'm not sure what that number is, and I'm willing to listen to what my fellow supervisors have to say, but I don't see our county getting any smaller, and I don't see the chair and vice chair's obligations getting any less. You know, we don't know who the chair or vice chair will be next year. I know Mary's been the chair previously. I've been the chair. It takes up a great deal of time. And in my mind, I'm hoping that we continue to have folks who are not just, and don't take this the wrong way, Steve, not just retired. That we have people who have jobs and who are going to take off time from work, and they're not going to be compensated to be at functions that you're required to be at. So those are some of the things that are factoring in. I want there to be a mixture, like there is on our board. We have retirees, we have folks who are working, and so I want to continue to foster that.
I would have to agree with Supervisor Tuck on that one. When I started this position, I did not realize it takes as many hours as it does. And I think the citizens, they don't see all the things that we do because of all the other committees and commissions that we sit on. Some of us have more of them than others. Sometimes because we volunteer because we're retired. But my wife keeps reminding me that I spend a lot of time doing this function. And as Chris has stated, the county is getting busier and busier all the time, so I expect that workload is going to increase. So I think it's definitely worth talking about.
I definitely think it's worth talking about. My thought on the amount, 24 is a good place to start. However, looking into the future, I think we should at least go to one of the scales that she brought up, be it the lower or the higher. I don't have any suggestions on that, but I think that's a good place to start so that in the future when they go back and say, hey, 10 years ago, they didn't come up to what even the scale was. So that's my point.
And please correct me if I'm wrong on this, Marty. My interpretation from the advice that Marty has given me is we can do one or another. So we could do a salary adjustment this year, but then by resolution, we could attach it to a scale adjustment or merit-based adjustment, or I guess it wouldn't be merit-based because it'd be hard who determines it. But like a scale adjustment, and you can vote on that by resolution each year within the budget. Is that correct?
No. You have two options. You have, right now you're set under the option of 11,000, which is the maximum. But then by ordinance, each year you can do up to 5% cost of living on top of that.
Okay, so we could
do, I asked Carol to give me that number. You could do 550 right now. But you have to do it by ordinance. You have to adopt it by the end of June. And that's effective July 1, immediately. The other option is the one where you guys set whatever salary you want, and then you set the chair and vice chair as well. You can only do that in an election year, and you got to do it before July 1, but it's not valid until January 1. So that process, and you do that by resolution, so it doesn't take an ordinance.
So we could do it by resolution now to do an adjustment that would get us close to.
Yeah, if you want to do more than 550, you'd have to do by the resolution.
But then in subsequent years, we could do by ordinance a cost of living type increase?
No.
No, because then we would have gone over
You've
11,000.
gone to the other way of doing it.
Got it.
So one is more restrictive than the other.
Every 2 years, you could do something.
Okay.
I kind of like giving the voters the opportunity. You know, I'm saying that
And that's why I said it.
we're passing that, and again, I'm saying this because, and one of the reasons I'm in favor of it is I'm not going to benefit from it, but I see the need for it. And so I kind of like the latter where we'll vote on it, but it won't go into effect until January 1, but it will hopefully start taking care of future boards.
All right, so you guys had 2 meetings unless you set a special meeting. Okay.
Any more comments?
I guess I've been the only one on the board that's been here when we've actually changed it. It's a really touchy subject because we're, all of us on this board are here to serve. But I'm in support of doing something. I think it's time to do something. I think 14 years is enough time to have the same salary. I think we really need to look at it. I think it encourages people, I think to Chris's point, with maybe people having to take off from work and that kind of thing. That's not easy to do, and because I've been on the board working and then retired, and it is harder. So if you're going to want, good quality candidates to come forward, I think that, that's helpful. I think that's helpful, and I think that the vice chair and the chairs need to be different. So, I'm, looking at the figures that Carol gave us, really, you could combine them all together and take an average if you wanted to, which would get it over like what, $3,367, but I don't know. Wherever you guys want to start. I think it should be higher than the 24 though.
Can I ask a question? So it's kind of apples and oranges if we're using the school board number.
Right.
I think because they started at a much lower place, and so the 2,400 is a much higher percentage than any of the options. My guess, but I don't know because I can't remember what the base was for the school board.
Yeah, they didn't make as much.
Was it
as we
like
did.
$4,000 or something
Very
like
low.
that? So it's actually like a 50% increase versus these are more like a 30% increase. Does anybody have any firm numbers about that? So starting from 2,400, I'm just saying, I don't even think that's even useful if what I remember is being correct.
And I think it's hard to compare the jobs. I know that during the school year, they're very busy. And I know in the summer, sometimes they'll take meetings off because they don't have as much on their plate. And they have meetings just like we have that go into 11 o'clock at night. And but that's rare for both bodies, I guess, in some ways. I like the 2,800. I would love for us to be 7-0 on that vote, and so I would support the 2,800, which is tied to basically the cost of living. And I would be happy to support that, and then add that 2,800 to on top of the chair and vice chair, so their salary would go up as well, on top of their additional salary. And as somebody who has been there, I wouldn't mind seeing their salary go up maybe by $3,000 and the rest of the boards go up by something like $2,800.
Where is the 2,800 coming from?
I believe that was one of the numbers. I'm sorry. Was it what?
It's 2,617 was the first category.
Okay, maybe that's
3,813 was the second category, and 3,672 was the third category.
All right.
The average is 3367.
Yeah, and
Somebody
I
asked
added
for
all
that.
three together and divided by 3 and got 3,367.
I guess I was I confused those numbers when they went down. So that there was a 2,600 number, and
That was just scale adjustments
the
only.
scale adjustments only. But that seems to be at least I'm looking to say is that everybody can support that, or is there another number in their mind that folks could, all 7 of us? Because to me, it would be helpful if we were all together on this.
Can I ask another question? So can we, Marty, say we want to keep up with whatever the county raises? We can't do that ever?
No, you Each time you set it, you have to go through that process.
Can we do that every year or
No, every
2 years?
unless you do the 5%, starting right now. If you go the other way, then you do it every election year.
Okay.
Which for us, every 2 years.
Okay.
Because we're staggered.
So I would like to propose that we use 3,400. It's just rounding up the 3,361. And then every 2 years, we'll revisit this.
So that would bring us to 14,400 for a supervisor, 15,600 for the vice chair, and 16,200 for the chair. So it leaves the same spread. It just creates a bigger base. And that's using 3,400. So that's higher than my original starting point. And I kind of went low on the starting point because I heard pretty loud that we wanted to discuss something very reasonable. And so I'm not hearing, Daryl, do you have something to say?
I don't know, and I can't, I don't have any reasoning behind it. Listening to Chris and listening to Sarah, I was like, how about 3 for the board members and 32 for the chair?
And so you wanted to go
That way it gives the chair a little more than what the board's, I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean,
So that would
I know the
take-
chair has a lot to do, and I just feel like it ought to be a little different.
So that would take it to 14,000 for a board member, 15,200 for the vice chair, and you said
32.
30. So then you would be at 16,000 even for the chair, under that math.
Looking at your first scenario of the 3,400, that's only $250 a month at more.
And it's actually paying the chair less by $200. And the vice chair less $400.
What do you mean?
Well,
No, the vice chair would be 15,600 and the chair would be 16,200.
That's based under the 3,400
Yeah.
versus the 3,000
32.
and 32.
I could support what Daryl just said, the 3,000 to the fellow supervisors, 3,200.
What about the vice chair?
And then the vice chair would also get it. In my mind, the vice chair is there at a lot of the functions, especially all the agenda review meetings, the county liaison meetings. Now, they are not, the vice chair isn't always there with the school board liaison meetings. I don't know, the chair there for the chamber meetings. So those are all meetings I'm thinking about that are obligations of the chair, and then a lot of those obligations are the vice chair as well. So I would keep those roughly the same.
And I think you need to think about too that, I know that Steve made the comment that a lot of us are on different things because we're retired, but those different things that we're on, they take a lot of time. Like you're running all over the place, like, with Phil and Fairlawn, and it's not just like it's I know I'm running all over the place. Maybe it's just me, but
No,
they take
I'm
time
right
too.
behind you on the interstate.
And so you're doing things that benefit, and you're representing the board also, even though you're not vice chair or chair. So I think you need to keep that in mind when you're talking about it.
So I'm hearing a plan and some support for a raise of 3,000 to the board salary, which would raise a supervisor from 11,000 to 14,000, and then 3,200 to both the vice chair and the chair. So that would take the vice chair to 15,400 and the chair to 16,000. Did I interpret that correctly?
Yep.
Yes, Steve.
I think I expressed this the last time we talked about it, that, I feel kind of funny about voting myself a pay raise when I still feel like I'm in the learning stage. But I also don't want to shortchange anybody that's on this board now that has been serving, and I definitely don't want to dissuade anybody in the future from running for a position here because of the financial burden. So, yeah, I think I could support Supervisor Shepherd's 3,000 increase.
So what are our next steps? And I'm looking at you, Mr. Meadows.
I'm going to look at Marty because I believe next steps would be the preparation, the resolution.
Board agenda.
So would we want a resolution then on our first June meeting on June the 10th?
That's up to you, but we can have it ready for you for the first June meeting.
I mean, again, it's up to you when you want to schedule it, but you could absolutely have it on the June 10th agenda if that's what you prefer.
Chair King?
Board.
I think
And
everybody's
could we
good.
show what that turns out to be a breakdown per year, you know, to help people understand that this is not, and they're going to see this one big raise, but they're not, some folks are not going to realize that you haven't had a raise in 14 years.
Yes.
And so maybe we could say this works out to be a percentage, you know,
X percent.
X percent, and if I was doing my rough math, that's going to be around 2%.
Yeah, it's pretty low.
We'll definitely put in the one of the whereas. You know, gotta have a set number of whereas, right, Carol?
Yeah.
One of the whereas we'll have, when's the last time this was done?
Did you catch those numbers from everything, Marty?
No, what I have is 14 for board members, 15 for vice chair, 16 for chair.
So,
And some whereases.
I think is there a way, and I'm just asking the question, is there a way to not increase Supervisor Fidjakowski's and not so much the chairs and mine? Because we're not up for election, right? So really, this could be an issue for the people who are up for election now. And then in 2 years, you know, we would be voted on. And I don't know. Is that ever done? That it's kind of staggered?
I'd say no. I mean, it sounds like a due process problem. How could you say
Steve, you're doing a terrible job.
one board member doesn't deserve more than the other?
I agree with
I
that.
appreciate
I'm
you
just
coming
curious.
up with that idea. It does solve a lot of problems for me, but it does seem to create more confusion. Because
think
what
there
if
may be some
next
legal
election
issues.
you got somebody else sitting here for District C? What happens to that person? So
Do they start off at the new salary?
Yeah, I don't know what that looks
so-
like, but it, you know, I like Supervisor Fidjakowski and I believe the same thing. We didn't get hired, you know, we haven't been here for 14 years, you know, anyway. So thank you.
Well, you can just subtract it and give it to the Animal Care and Adoption Center as a donation.
Great idea.
I think I have enough animals in my house.
Or maybe you can set it aside for retired board members as a fund. If you don't want to take it, you know, we'll be happy to.
So I think we're done with that
Is that
for now.
Yeah.
staff?
Got what you need?
Marty, Carol, we good with moving forward with putting a resolution together?
Yeah, we'll compare two resolutions. One with Mr. Fidjakowski getting less.
Okay.
Is there a motion about a work session?
So moved.
Second.
Madam Secretary, call roll, please.
Mr. Tuck? Aye. Mr. Fitchukowski?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Bowman?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Chair
Aye.
King?
Aye.
7 ayes.
We're going to take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll be back. All right, we'll get started again. If you would, please, sir.
Mr. Chair and board members, first item of new business this evening is a resolution to amend the county's procurement policies and procedures, Chapter 12, Section 12.3, related to vehicle replacement. This is to allow departments ample time to remove emergency equipment from old vehicles, and also allows other local government agencies within a 75-mile radius of the county an opportunity to purchase surplus vehicles from the county.
Is there any discussion?
I like the fact that we're giving opportunities to other localities, because if things get bad here and some localities are not as fortunate as we are, they'll come to our aid, because we've been able to provide them equipment that maybe is a little bit on the older side, but they're very grateful to be able to have.
Still get some use out of it, yes.
I agree.
Well, and also if we're surplusing it within Montgomery County, it makes it a bit more marketable if we extend where we're surplusing it to.
Any more discussion? Madam Secretary, call roll, please.
Motion.
I'll make a
No
motion.
motion.
Yeah.
So moved.
I'll second. Third.
Now you can call roll, please.
In other words, we want to do it.
Mr. Fisakowski?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Bowden?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Oh.
Chair
There.
King?
They're cleaning the ductworks. We'll see if that stops in a second.
Who's cleaning the ductwork?
Servo.
That, if that does it again, we'll have to stop, but I hope that's it.
Talk fast.
Motivation to finish up the meeting.
I'll move that.
So, let me at least say what it is. Second item under new business is the resolution approving the 6-year road improvement plan for secondary roads in Montgomery County. This is requested by VDOT each year, and I'll say a little more about that under my county administrator report, but we can move forward with this, and it can be amended at any time later on should we desire to do so.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
This did include an increase in mileage for that low water bridge. I think I remember seeing it. Yes. Okay. For is it Taylor Hollow?
Taylor Hollow,
Yeah.
yes.
Let me ask the question. I think you answered it when you said it could be amended, so that if we take our
Road viewers tour.
road view and we find something that is dire,
Yes, we can amend
we
it.
can amend it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And that was on the advice from David Clark at VDOT. That way they can go ahead and get the process started. Should there not be any changes, we can move forward, but you certainly have the right to amend it.
Any more discussion? Madam Secretary, call roll.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Bowden?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Fisakowski?
Aye.
Chair King?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Mr. Chair, next item is to schedule a public hearing on the proposed boundary adjustment agreement with the town of Christiansburg for 176.374 acres of property commonly known as the Cross Point Foursquare Conference Center. And this is at the request of the property owner to the 2 local governments.
Is there a motion?
Motion.
Second.
Any discussion? Madam Secretary, call roll, please.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Bowden?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Fisakowski?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Chair King?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Mr. Chair, next item is a request to schedule a public hearing for a proposed boundary adjustment with the town of Christiansburg for approximately 26 acres of property adjacent to Falling Branch Road, Reagan's Point subdivision, and Interstate 81 northbound entrance ramp D. And again, this is at the request of the property owner to the 2 local governments.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Madam Secretary, call roll, please.
Ms. Bowden?
Aye.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Fisakowski?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Chair King?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Did you forget me?
So long. It's hard to say.
I want to say Tuck.
All right, board members, last item this evening is to schedule another public hearing for the proposed boundary adjustment agreement with the town of Christiansburg. This is for a very small tract of property, approximately 1/3 of an acre, being a portion of lots 1 through 7 in Reagan's Point subdivision. This is, again, at the request of the property owner. This one basically cleans up. The lots 1 through 7 are divided between the town and the county. This pulls all the property inside the corporate limits of the town.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Madam Secretary, call roll, please.
Mr. Shepherd?
Aye.
Mr. Tuck?
Aye.
Mr. Motts?
Aye.
Ms. Biggs?
Aye.
Ms. Bone?
Aye.
Ms. Fitchkowski?
Aye.
Chair King?
Aye.
7 ayes.
Move right along. County Attorney's report.
Just a follow-up on the boundary adjustment, just so you guys have some context. We'll have 5 boundary adjustments with Christiansburg. We have one that's scheduled, public hearing scheduled for June 10th, and that's the former
Meadows Golf and
Meadows,
Swim.
yeah, property. And then you have the 3 tonight, which will be on the 24th. And then we'll have one more still to schedule, and that's our property, or the EDA's property / county's property, the Fallen Branch, and the expansion of that park. We're going to put that in town. So that's still to come. So there'll be 5 boundary adjustments with Christiansburg. And these have been talked about for a while, and they finally got us the plan, so we're moving forward.
Thank you.
That's all.
And just to tag on to Marty's comment on that, part of the agreement with the town is the property will come into the town, and in exchange, the town will extend water and sewer for those lots for utilities for future development. So,
County Administrator report.
Mr. Chair, I've got just a couple of things this evening. I was commenting earlier that usually after budget season, you have a few weeks to dig out, and then it starts to slow down a little for summertime. It's not slowing down any. I have been very fortunate to be at several events recently and meet a lot of folks out in the county. A week or so ago, I was the guest speaker at the Belmont Brewerton Club, which I learned a lot more about Brewertons that night. That was a very good group. I enjoyed that. Last week, had the opportunity to attend the RSVP volunteer luncheon. It's always a good event and get to see a lot of retired folks. And Carol and Angie and several of our staff attend that each year as well. Also last week, we had 2 events on one night. We had the New River Valley Regional Commission annual dinner, which I know several of you were able to attend. We also had the first annual Hospitality Awards for the Montgomery County Tourism Program. Probably had about 70 folks at that meeting. That was very nice. Recognized several folks in the hospitality industry for the good work they do in our community. Tomorrow I'll be attending a seminar put on by the New River Health District related to opioids and their impact on Montgomery County. They have several speakers lined up during the day to talk about the impacts in other parts of the state that the opioid epidemic is creating. I think that will be very informative. I appreciate Dr. Bissell inviting me to that. 2 dates I want to get on your calendar, and one date I want to tell you can take off your calendar. First, the Road Viewers Tour. It appears consensus is that will work on Saturday, June the 8th. So we'll be getting that set up. Have not set a start time yet. It is a Saturday morning, so I want to be mindful of your time, but we could start, or I heard early down here. Is 8 too early, or do you want to kick it to 8:30?
8's good.
Let's kick it to 7.
7's good.
7, oh my gosh.
So 8.
Ooh, man. Hey, I work.
Shook him up.
I don't know. I tend to wake up earlier on the weekends than I do during the week, so it doesn't matter to me. But let's tentatively say 8, if that will work, and we'll work with planning and GIS to map out our route. I'm hopeful. I'm trying to remember last time we did this. It seems that we were done around lunchtime. Because our last stop was the old animal shelter. I remember that.
Yeah, the old animal shelter, so
town.
everyone could see it.
Yeah, that
Craig,
was-
so if we have roads that we want everyone to see, do we send them to
send them
Emily?
to me or to Emily, either one. Yeah.
So we would start here, hop in together.
We'll start here. We'll have a van. We'll have to arrange for a driver. I did it last time, but I don't know if you want me to do that again.
I can try.
Okay. And we have a bus driver too, so I don't know. We'll figure it out.
Hey, I like driving.
All right. June the 8th is the Road Viewers Tour. Also, go ahead and add to your calendar Monday, June 17th. I know we've mentioned that a couple of times, but we'll have an extended work session that evening at 6 o'clock in MP2. I got to confirm MP2, but that's our plan right now. MP2 for our extended work session. We'll be talking about county capital projects and giving you updates on several of those things.
What time does it start?
6 o'clock. And the meeting that you can take off your calendar that we had discussion at last week's agenda review is due to not having any public hearings scheduled and a lot of folks being on vacation. The July 8th Board of Supervisors meeting has been canceled.
That never happens.
So,
Oh, wow.
well, we talked about it quite a bit, but we don't have any public hearings scheduled for that night. I know a lot of people are going to be out of town. The 4th is that previous week. Some of us will be out of town the next week. And that just worked out to be a good time to give you a break. So, no meeting on July the 8th. And Mr. Chair, with that, that's all I have.
Supervisor Shepherd.
No report.
Supervisor Tuck.
Wanted to report back a little bit from the Fire and Rescue Commission. We had a situation with a patient who was 900 pounds. We do not have the equipment to be able to handle somebody who is 900 pounds, and this is becoming a more commonplace in our community. You may have remembered there was an individual who had to be cut out of her home in Christiansburg because she could not get out of the residence. The fire and rescue are talking about different ideas. There's not so much of a demand that we would need an ambulance at each one of the locations, but one of the things that they were talking about is a potential of utilizing an older ambulance that's getting ready to come out of service out at Reiner, removing a portion of it to make additional room inside the ambulance, and then you basically, instead of the stretcher, and I don't know if y'all have seen the hydraulics, and how they're lifted, you would basically create a ramp that comes up, and you still have a winch to pull the stretcher in, but also have a bariatric type stretcher that would accommodate somebody of around 1,000 pounds. So I know that we've got a policy about when you turn a vehicle in, you put it up for sale. But that may be a modification. There was some concerns about if you don't run a vehicle, that's not good for it. So there was some talk about how to deal with that situation because gas shouldn't sit that long in the vehicle, those type of things. But they may be coming back to the board to talk about designing one of those and utilizing an older ambulance. The last individual, the 900-pound individual, we called and it had to come out of Roanoke to come get that individual, and they were still providing the individual care, but that's still a long period of time, and to be able to find an ambulance that would be able to accommodate that, and that individual is still alive, and so we need to be able to care for it, and as they said, this is becoming a more common thing. So go ahead.
Do any of the private services have ambulances that are already set up?
I think Carillion's on one.
Well, Carilion has some services, but there is a lot of pride in the volunteers that they want to be able to take care of our citizens. They don't want to see this start getting farmed out. They want to be able to handle it. At least that was the impression I got. So if they come back to us, that may be a request of some monies for a winch, or also a little bit different on our policy of where there would be utilizing that ambulance. I think it was the one out Reiner, and they were saying it has about 60-some thousand miles on it, but it's getting ready to age out. And so they thought that might be an answer. And then they're going to talk with it and then come back with a recommendation to us. The other thing, we just had a meeting. And the reason that we're able to have a meeting is because of the individuals who are named up on that memorial in downtown Christiansburg. They gave up their lives, and yesterday was Memorial Day. and to recognize those individuals who sacrificed their life to make sure that democracy on every single level, including this, exists. And so I would be remiss if I didn't thank the individuals and their families who lost them and thank them for their service to our country.
Thank you, sir. Supervisor Steve.
I only have one item. I, too, was at the New River Valley Regional Commission dinner this past week, and it was very well attended. I think there might have been 100 people there, and several other supervisors, Supervisor DeMotts and Supervisor Biggs were there. It was a good time, and they award several awards at the dinner, and this year the award of Champion of the Valley was given to our own delegate Nick Rush, who has done quite a bit of work for the folks out here in this part of the state. The Citizen of the Valley Award was given to Ray Smoot, who is our new Commonwealth Transportation Board member. And the Friend of the Valley was given to John Smolak, who works for Appalachian Power. And I thought it was very nice. All three attended, and all were well deserved of the award. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Supervisor Biggs.
And to follow on Steve's, John Smolak has helped with some economic development, in the New River Valley, so that was really good. Okay. I went to the VACO spring board meeting, and a couple things. There is a new prescription card, and I talked to Craig about it. We want to find out all the information because evidently it can save our citizens money, and it's much better than the last one that came about, and it can also, you can use it for pets. But one of the things that they suggested it be used for is in our jails, to save money for when we have people in our jails. So we're going to find out some more information from Dean Lynch, and then we'll bring that back to you. The ethics training, the conflict of interest that supervisors are going to have to take, starting, I guess it will be July 1st, somewhere between July 1st and the end of December. They have not finished developing it yet, but it's probably going to be, an online type thing. And I know I mentioned this to Marty before because I've had to take it for, for the two things I serve on statewide. And I think, according to the VACO attorney, it's going to sort of be like that, like you would watch it, go through all the different, parts of it, and then you push a button, it's supposed to register. That's sometimes an issue. So they're trying to work all that out. So I guess, Marty, you'll keep us updated about when they get it finished, and we'll know.
Yeah.
And evidently the clerks are going to have to keep track of it some way, our local clerk. That's all I found out about that. At the New River Valley Community Services Board, our board, we should be so proud of that board because they're a leader in the state. And they even got a call from Fairfax County's Community Services Board as to how to do some things. And so that's saying a lot right there. The other thing I wanted to bring up is what are we doing, or how's it going with our plan to fund the Christiansburg Strand school projects? And so I thought I'd bring that up, and Craig maybe could tell us where we are with that.
I can mention that briefly. We'll have, I think the plan right now is to have resolutions on both June meetings. The first June meeting, there should be a resolution to provide funding for the Phase 3 work at the Christiansburg High School athletic fields. I believe I'm right, Carol, that you've had a conversation with...
Provided we get a request from the school.
Exactly, providing the schools provide the request. My understanding is they're working on that. Then at the second June meeting, we will be talking about the funding that will be available beginning July 1 for the schools to move forward with A&E work on those projects, and we'll be allocating funding for those. Also, at the June 17th meeting of the board, the extended work session, we'll be talking about the county capital projects that are coming up. Once we get consensus from the board on those projects, we'll be providing that input to Courtney Rogers as well. Courtney's already done a lot of work, and then hopefully we'll have a presentation to the board late July, early August about looking at a bond issue coming up in the months ahead. So things are rolling along there. I know that our two staffs, Tommy Krantz with the schools and Carol and Angie on our side, have met and looked at a tentative cash flow projection based on the projects that they have in mind, and we should be in good shape. The board should be able to allocate the funds to keep them moving.
And last but not least, some of us were able to attend the memorial service, the officers' memorial service that the sheriff's department had at the public safety building. It was as always very moving, and I know it meant a lot to them that some of us were able to attend. And as Chris said, with our veterans, we also can't forget our law enforcement officers and everything they do every day for us, and every day they leave, and as Steve and Daryl know, you leave and everyone hopes you come home. So that was a very moving experience, and that's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Supervisor Bone.
So outside of board requirements, at my day job, I was invited to attend Supervisor Biggs' Rotary meeting last Thursday. And I had attended that meeting, I guess it's the Blacksburg
Rotary Club.
Blacksburg Rotary Club at the Blacksburg Country Club at noon on Thursdays. And I've been to that meeting several times, but this time, I guess it was their recruiting meeting. And it was unique in that they had stations throughout the room that new people who might be interested in joining could learn all about what Rotary does, not just in our community, but throughout the world. And it was very impressive, well organized. And that club, as well as the other clubs in our area, are just such a gift to our community and help us in so many different ways. So I just wanted to give a shout out and thank them, as well as the other Rotarians in the area, for all the work that they do, in addition to Ruritans and Kiwanis and those other lines organizations throughout our community. That's all.
Vice Chair DeMoss.
No report.
You heard me. I took up all the time, I'm sorry.
You took her thunder about July's meeting.
Well, I said y'all could announce it, but no.
No report. Meeting adjourned.